Hello, my name is Mike Ward. I'm the Global Director of Content at Informa Pharma Intelligence, the publishers of Pink Sheet, Scrip, In Vivo and Generics Bulletin. We're here in Amsterdam at the BioEurope Spring Meeting where biotechs, pharma, investors all get together to sort of discuss the progress that they're making, but also start sort of initial discussions around potential deal making. I'm joined by Frans Wuite, who's the CEO of a Danish biotech called Acesion Pharma. Yeah. So a lot of sort of biotechs are sort of in rare disease spaces or sort of have specific sort of target in oncology, one of the hot areas. Not many people go into an area like cardiovascular, which is normally the domain of the big companies. So what is it that you're doing that you think is going to make a difference in that space?
I think we've been very fortunate in finding a very specific target that allows us to be targeted in our approach. Otherwise, as you say, it's a very vast area. And this allows us to be looking at diseases that are particularly then affected by a targeted therapy like ours. And in our case, it's called atrial fibrillation, which is the most common arrhythmia.
Yes.
It might not be mortal per se in the short term, but it might very well lead to that in the longer term. And currently there is a very poor penetration of drug treatments because they haven't been selective to the target, to the atria themselves. And we've sort of consistently shown, like in 5 species and in tox safety data, that we are very much specific to the atria. So we can treat the problem where we are, and therefore we have the courage to go in this vast area and to this large indication with a very targeted therapy approach.
So what is the target that you're
It's
focused
called the
on?
SK channels, and the SK channels are important for regulating the heart rhythm.
Right.
And they are primarily functionally expressed in the atria rather than elsewhere in the heart.
Okay.
And the problem with current drugs are that they might be effective if given in right doses, but they're not selective to the atria. So if you fix the problem in the atria, you dysregulate potentially the currents in the ventricles, and that gets you from bad to worse, even to potentially lethal situations. And that has led to the fact that the acute part of this treatment has been completely confined to hospitals. There are no targeted therapies in this area that you could take as a pill if you get an episode.
Yeah.
And there we think we can make a change because our therapy has been shown so far, hopefully soon in man as well, to be very safe cardiacally. And we've just actually started off our phase 1 study in this very country. So we're now actually making a big milestone in our small company going into man.
Okay, so the focus on the SK channels, I mean, where did that idea first come from?
Well, it has been looked also into, as often, drugs with that are looked for cardiac safety as a byproduct. They have to be cardiacally safe, have been tested. And there was this is quite some time ago, I wasn't around at that time, but there were smart scientists making an observation that it actually provided some shielding, some protective effects to those cardiac side effects that were controlled. And so that is what has led us to spin this out to become a targeted therapy into cardiology. So
okay.
This is the story.
So when was the company created?
2011.
Right, 2011. So in the sort of 7 years since then, how have you been financed? And I mean, you mentioned you've gone into man, so that is obviously a major milestone, but what other sort of your milestones have you achieved in that 7 years?
Well, there are the traditional things. You have to find your lead compound, you have to be able to produce it, you have to find the stability of the molecules and so on, and then you have to test the efficacy in animals. There's no substitute for that in this area, and then you have to also test for safety. And these are all consecutive steps that we have undertaken. We've been funded initially by Danish funds for early stages, and we've been very grateful in that. But we've also had the fortunate situation of getting 2 grants or 2 awards by the Wellcome Trust, which is quite rare to have. You might be spoiled in Britain to have a few companies like that, but there are not very many outside Britain, and we're definitely the only one in the Nordic area that has received 2 of those. And then we have our domestic large player in the life science area, Novo Holdings, which has sort of matched that investment.
Okay, so you sort of say, right, you you've just announced the first in man trial. Going forward, what are your plans or your ambitions for the company?
Well, there are a few ways one can embark upon. We are fortunate to have an acute setting in this atrial fibrillation market, which allows for shorter duration of clinical studies. So that means that the studies don't cost that much as longer ones, of course. And also the outcomes are quickly read out, the readouts are quicker because you can map out the ECG if the heart rhythm has converted into the sinus rhythm, as we call it, and also that it doesn't cause any other cardiac side effects, which you could also measure by the ECG. So there's also the maintenance area, which is the other part of our portfolio, where you try to maintain the heart rhythm from going astray. And so there's actually a two-pronged approach that we're embarking upon. And so the initial proof of concept will happen in the cardio version of the acute setting, but obviously the bigger treatment for chronic treatment is in the maintenance setting. So we're actively pursuing both, and we're looking at creative ways to fund our activities in both areas. That may entail early partnering, because there's been some considerable interest in this area, as you well can imagine, but also maybe going for the next round with some new investors on board, a larger syndicate, international syndicate, or a combination of both.
So what would that timeline look like? I mean, sort of you start the phase one. When would you expect to have that complete, and when would you be looking to make some decisions about further development?
Well, as I said, it's an acute indication, so the phase one doesn't take that longer time in this setting, and we should have our readouts mid-summer this year, and by August the final report. As it comes to then the true proof of concept, meaning that you go then not into healthy volunteers any longer, but you go into the disease population. We anticipate 2020 to be the year when we have the data, so it's still 2 years from now, but still relatively soon.
Right. But would you need a partner on board to help you execute that plan?
We are funded to take ourselves through in our first initial indication in that area. We may look for additional funding to support the other programs that we have in this very field of atrial fibrillation.
Okay. So, what's going to keep you busy then between now and 2020 when you...
Well, I think meticulous execution of the clinical studies in particular, and then of course our entertaining the communication and interaction with any interested parties, and seeing, what it is that they desire to make this successful, and to see if there's some synergies in our plans and their needs. And that's our business, as you know, in biotech and pharmaceuticals at this stage of the companies.
Okay. Well, Frans, thanks very much for stopping by.
My pleasure, Mark.
Cheers.
Okay.